Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Dolan, and welcome to my Saturday afternoon weekly live stream. I don't have Tracy here for these. This is simply me and you for about 15, 20, 30 minutes, however long these go. For the last few weeks, I've been doing a kind of a retrospective historical analysis, or at least description of some of the UFO encounters that are described in the History Channel's current series called Project Blue Book. So the first week, we started off, I talked about the Gorman UFO sighting of 1948. Last week, the very fascinating and I think very deeply misunderstood Flatwoods monster case. And this week, I want to talk about episode 3, or at least the historical case that episode 3 described or discussed, which is the Lubbock Lights case of August 25th, 1951. Now, again, I'm not going to go break down the way that the TV show changed everything, because they changed a lot, changed a great deal. But I do want to emphasize the fact that the historical case itself is really quite fascinating, and I think to this day, not really explained in any satisfying way. This has always been my take on it. And I mean, the official explanation that came down from the Air Force and from Air Force Captain Edward Ruppelt, who investigated this, is that these lights were a reflection of a certain bird called plover under the new street lamps that had just been installed in the city. And I'm going to show you the pictures of the Lubbock Lights and get into a lot of the details of this. And I really think it's fair to say that this is not a reasonable explanation for this sighting. But the question is, what is a more reasonable explanation? So before I get into any of that, let me go into some of the details. And as I have been doing just lately, I've got a couple of screen shares with you. I want to show you some images as we go along. I'll come back and every now and then. So this is a map of where Lubbock is in the context of the United States and Texas. You can see it's in the northern portion of Texas, not far from New Mexico, about 300 miles east of Albuquerque. And that's significant. I'll get into that in a short while. But that's Lubbock. And I just want to, basically what happened is this whole thing kicks off officially on the night of August 25th, 1951. It's a clear, warm Saturday evening. And there were 3 professors from the school. It was the Texas Technological College in Lubbock. And they're just hanging out. They're just relaxing in the backyard of one of those professors. He was a Dr. Robinson, a professor of geology. A Dr. A.G. Oberg, a professor of chemical engineering, was with him, and a Dr. W.L. Ducker, professor and the head of the petroleum engineering department. Yeah, it's Texas, and they're going to have a petroleum engineering department, you bet. So they're out in the yard of Dr. Robinson. They're just relaxing in chairs in his yard. They're talking shop, and they see a string of lights. Incidentally, this is a picture of 3 of them, and the gentleman on the far right is a later witness, because these individuals will see the same phenomenon about a week later. But anyway, they see a string of lights in a crescent formation, and these lights are moving from the northeast to the southeast, so north to south, at a speed that they all consider to be pretty incredible, very fast. By the way, you have to love this photograph. Do you miss the days of professors with pipes? Kind of a thing. I remember my very favorite professor when I was an undergraduate at Alfred University in upstate New York, smoked a pipe on a regular basis. Something very, very nice about it. You just see these gents with their pipes. Anyway, they are kind of astonished at the speed of these lights. In fact, they got a pretty good look at it, even though it was fast. They said the lights gave off a kind of glow. They thought might have been a reflection from something, and possibly they wondered if it was a reflection from the city of Lubbock, which was below their position. one thing absolutely is that they were very surprised by this. They noticed that the lights seemed to become overhead, come overhead very, very fast, and then cross the entire sky in about 3 seconds. So they were quite intrigued by this. And they thought, let's stay out a little later and see if we see anything else. Well, they didn't have to wait much longer. About 3 minutes later, a second group of about 50 lights, they estimated, in a kind of semicircular formation flashed overhead. And one of them said, frankly, we were astonished. And if I had not had confirming witnesses at the time, I feel sure I should have said nothing about what I saw, for it is incredible to believe that they are of terrestrial origin. That's a really amazing thing for one of these professors to have said. And he said, and even more incredible to believe that they are from beyond the earth. So they contact the local Lubbock newspaper, which runs the story, and it's after this that everyone starts talking. Everyone in Lubbock, this is a real buzz, because what was very quickly discovered is, in fact, I'm going to stop sharing this screen here with you and come back to me. What they discover is that there are a lot of witnesses to these types of lights, and it wasn't simply that night. So another professor immediately came out and said, oh, yes, I saw possibly the exact same thing a couple of nights earlier than these professors. And then there were other non-university people, just ordinary citizens and residents of the town, who said that they believe they saw possibly the same thing. And all of them, these were low flying objects. They typically said moving at a very, very high speed. Low, silent is another element of it. So this was definitely a talk of the town. And it's interesting to note that there was, I don't detect that there was a lot of ridicule among the locals about these sightings. It seemed to be the only point of controversy is over what were they seeing. And there were people early on who thought this is birds. They're going north to south. That's the migratory pattern of birds in the fall in the Lubbock area. People were used to that for sure. And so that was one possibility. And there was the fact that the town had installed these new mercury vapor street lights that were apparently very powerful. And, the question is, were there birds that were in migration that were flying overhead and reflecting the lights? This was a theory more or less throughout the whole controversy of the Lubbock Lights. So, but the thing is, most witnesses seem to have said not birds. The professors were quite adamant that these were not birds. They said these are way too fast. Birds do not fly like this. Now, what was also interesting is the very same night as that first reported sighting, August 25th, there was a sighting of a silent flying wing over Albuquerque by Sandia Air Force Base, about 300 miles to the west of Lubbock. A security personnel and his wife were in that area, and both of them were quite adamant about having seen a low glowing. I have my notes here. I'm just going to read you a statement. This is an intelligence synopsis of the sighting. Sandia Bay security guard name deleted, reported sighting large object similar to a flying wing, but 1.5 times larger than a B-36, observed by himself and his wife, pass over East Albuquerque area just before 10 p.m. at night. So again, the time is not radically different. The professors saw their object just after 9 o'clock in Lubbock, and 45 minutes later, roughly over near Albuquerque, this thing is seen. They go on, says they described it as very low, maybe 1,000 feet altitude. If you know your altitude, that's quite low. And moving at about 300 miles per hour, which at low altitude, I would consider that rather fast. And what's more interesting than any of that is the fact that this object was silent. When you're that low going that fast, seems to me that you're very likely to hear a sound, but these two did not hear a sound. They noticed glowing white lights on the trailing edge of the wing and black stripes under the wing. So it was a flying wing type of object is what they were saying. Silent, flew straight, very level, end of that. So the Air Force intelligence was very interested in the Sandia sighting, and they became interested in the Lubbock sighting as well. I'm going to show you a couple of other images here. So here we go. This is one of the newspaper accounts. This is from a few days later, and that is because the sightings continue. This is a newspaper from September 1st, and one of the things that this is referring to, all week long, incidentally, there had been various sightings by residents of Lubbock of what they believe were probably the same object or something very similar, because there were lots of these light formations being seen. And a young man, 18-year-old man by the name of Carl Hart, that's him right there, takes a series of remarkable photographs of this object. And there's the four of them. I'll give you a close-up view of them in just a moment. But so it's August 31st. Hart he's 18 years old. He takes five photographs. Four of them are good. These are the four. I'll show you the fifth in a minute. So he says his account of this is that he was just lying on his bed in his room. He was looking out the window. It's at night. He sees flashing lights. He grabs his camera. It's a 35 millimeter Kodak, which 35 millimeter was very advanced for this time period, in my opinion. Anyway, he runs outside, he waits, and he's ready when he sees more flights overhead, and I guess very efficiently took these pictures. He was immediately accused of hoaxing. In fact, took a lot of heat from some of the local newspaper people who said, this is not possible. Hart, as far as I could tell, was always very, very adamant that these were genuine photographs. Didn't seem to be fazed either by the fact that these accusations were occasionally made at him. His attitude, even years later, he's interviewed like, I think 18 years later, and just said, this is exactly what happened. I went out and I took the pictures, and there you have it. These photographs were studied in detail by U.S. Air Force intelligence, and no one ever determined that these were a hoax. As Ruppelt also said, that they were not determined to be genuine either, but I don't think that they're a hoax. Seems to me that Carl Hart was able to take these pictures. Now, what's interesting is that a professional photographer tried duplicating the photos by taking pictures, by waiting. He went up to the best location in Lubbock, good visibility, and in the evening, and was waiting for overflying birds, and tried with his very excellent equipment to take pictures of the birds. And a couple of times he did it, and he just came up with nothing. So the bottom line is that these lights were really bright. They're way brighter than reflections of birds, as far as anyone can tell. And by the way, the objects on this evening, this is August 31st, were observed at 3 different distinct times at night, between 8:40 p.m. and 10:37 p.m. And all of the witnesses, it wasn't just Carl Hart this night, there were many other witnesses. They all said that the objects were flying in exactly this type of formation, that is a V-shaped or sometimes a U-shaped formation. And as far as I've been able to tell, all of them said that these objects basically zoomed overhead at tremendous speed. So that's what you have here. And this is a close-up of probably the best known one of Hart's images. And what's interesting is that, like, this one of all of them looks closest to perhaps being a structured wing craft, I would say. Here's another one. where you can see some camera motion. It looks like, or there's some kind of a blur effect of the wing of the lights, but it's a different light formation than this one. So what is going on? Now, one source that I read indicated that Hart actually took the photographs in separate sightings of these objects. Well, it's a little frustrating to me. Here's the fifth one, that kind of less excellent one of his photographs. It's not clear to me, when you go through the different accounts of this, how many sessions, distinct moments Hart took. They're all 5 different pictures, but were they taken at radically different times? And one of the sources I read indicated that that could have been the case. If that's so, that's really quite remarkable indeed. So the pictures are a bit of a mystery, in my opinion. So here's I'm not sure when this one is taken from. I love the caption of this. One of the tests done by the scientists is called enhancement. The computer zeroes in on the image and they do their enhancement. And in this newspaper article, they're saying, look, these are obviously not birds. And I would agree. I don't think that they are birds at all. One other thing that I just wanted to mention is that, relating to Hart's photographs, like these here, the professors were dubious that Hart was able to do this. I don't think they accused him of hoaxing, but they honestly could not see how it was possible that he was able to take these pictures, because they just said, look, these objects were moving way too fast. How was he able to do this? And they just didn't think that anyone would be able to take a picture. Maybe with cameras we have today, if you have it out and you're ready, you could do it. But I think it would be a bit of a challenge. I'm not saying impossible, but definitely a challenge. So so that's it with Hart's photos. And the other thing that is very obvious is that these are way too bright to be plover. And here, by the way, so here's a picture of plover. These are birds. Now, the bird aficionados among you are going to be able to quickly say to me, there's a lot of different types of plover, Richard Dolan, and you're not getting the right ones for Texas. And you are probably correct, because I couldn't tell which are the plover that migrate over Texas. But my own take on it is, I looked at a lot of plover images. They all look kind of similar to me. And I thought this one looks as good as any. I tried to find images of plover in formation. And here's the thing, I couldn't really find them. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but what I'm saying is there were a lot of pictures like this that I found where they're just flying, no formation whatsoever. It's very difficult for me to imagine that these things are plover at night with reflections under these types of street lamps. These are pictures of mercury vapor street lamps, similar to the kind that was recently installed in Lubbock, and which was the explanation given basically by Ruppelt. And here's the thing, Edward Ruppelt did travel to Lubbock. Here's a picture of Ruppelt. And he interviewed the professors. He interviewed Carl Hart. He interviewed other people who claimed to have seen the lights. His conclusion initially was that the witnesses had seen plover. He talked about the lights. He said the plover flying over Lubbock during their annual migration were reflecting these new street lights at night. So, I mean, in a sense, you could see that there's a logic here. Something new. The street lights were new. They were causing a new optical phenomenon that the residents of Lubbock maybe were not used to. Now, there were witnesses who did support this idea. There were some witnesses who said, yes, we did see, or I saw what appeared to be, I'm going to stop sharing here, what appeared to be birds. In fact, a couple of them were quite adamant. Others were equally adamant that they were not birds. So where does that leave us? That's very frustrating. Ruppelt himself noticed that there were holes in the plover theory. Like, he was aware, for example, that there were sightings of these lights that did not take place near any street lamps. And, this was lurking around, rattling around in the back of his mind, I'm sure, even when he said it was plover. And he was also very aware, of course, of the flying wing sightings near Albuquerque at Sandia Air Force Base. And also there were flying wing, fairly adamant flying wing type witnesses in the Lubbock area as well. He spoke to at least one witness who said, look, this thing came very low over my house. Got a look at it. Or at least that was what this witness said to Ruppelt. So he knew that there were other possibilities. And you really get the idea, even early on, that he was not 100% satisfied with the plover explanation. Now, I am going to read to you something that he wrote in his book. His book on the report on unidentified flying objects, where he returns to the Lubbock case. He writes about it in some detail. And, this is almost typical Ruppelt. Like, it's a great book. It's a wonderful book. But Ruppelt could be a real tease when it came to a lot of the things he wrote about. He would give you these little hints and tidbits of things and leave you wondering, wait, what are we talking about? So I'm just going to read his description, his final conclusion of the Lubbock Lights here. And his conclusion is that it's something natural and prosaic, but sorry, I can't tell you what it is. That's actually his explanation. And he gives his reason for it. He said, look, I met with a person who did very, very detailed analysis of the Lubbock Lights, and he really demanded anonymity, wouldn't let me, he said, I'll just tell you this is my conclusion, but you can't give it away because I have to keep myself anonymous. So you just throw up your hands with stuff like that. This is what Ruppelt wrote. The lights that the professors saw, the backbone of the Lubbock Light series, have been positively identified as a very commonplace and easily explainable natural phenomenon. It's very unfortunate that I can't divulge exactly the way the answer was found, because it is an interesting story of how a scientist set up complete instrumentation to track down the lights, and how he spent several months testing theory after theory until he finally hit upon the answer. Telling the story would lead to his identity, and in exchange for his story, I promised the man complete anonymity. But he fully convinced me that he had the answer, and after having heard hundreds of explanations of UFOs, I don't convince easily. All I got to say is thanks, Ed Ruppelt, for a whole lot of nothing. What is this explanation? It comes down to trust me, the worst kind of explanation. And Ruppelt, look, was a very good writer, and he's absolutely worth reading. But I have to say, of all of Ruppelt's explanations and of different cases, this is one of the most lame, least satisfying of them all. So there you go. Now, the other thing about Ruppelt and how he talked about the Lubbock Lights kind of in the aftermath, I think this is significant. This is another example of Ruppelt being just a total tease. He said, look, the Air Force was investigating Lubbock Lights, but there was also another group investigating them. In fact, I believe I mentioned this when I gave a talk on Ruppelt with Tracy a couple of weeks ago. But basically, he drops this little hint. There is another group investigating the Lubbock Lights. Ruppelt never gave their name. That would have been nice, but he said they were very powerful and they had complete access to all of the Air Force files on UFOs. So whoever they are sound like they had a lot of sway and pull within the government, but they were an unofficial group. And anyway, he said they were scientists, they were rocket experts, nuclear physicists, intelligence experts. He writes, they banded together to study our UFO reports because they were convinced that some of the UFOs that were being reported were interplanetary spaceships. And he writes, they believe the Lubbock series was one of these reports. So he gives you this little bit. At the same time, he says, nope, totally prosaic. And think about the kind of odd discrepancy. On the one hand, Ruppelt is saying, nope, totally prosaic. I can't tell you what it is, but it's totally commonplace. And yet these powerful scientists and government men who had access to everything, you have to assume they were very intelligent, very well informed. They're convinced the Lubbock Lights were extraterrestrial spaceships, but Ruppel figured it out. Thanks, guys. You don't need to get too concerned about it. There's a lot of contradiction here, obviously. So we come down to really a fascinating story. And like a lot of good UFO accounts, there's this frustration that you have with the Lubbock Lights. What was it ultimately? Was it a test flight of a flying wing type of a craft? Even back in the early 50s, there were people who wondered, is this a secret test of something or another? There's no explanation that people ever really came to that when you really get into it, that you find very satisfying. When you think of Carl Hart's photographs, what were those? Were they a hoax? It doesn't seem like a hoax to me, and it doesn't seem like birds to me. I don't find that to be a reasonable explanation. How was Carl Hart able to take several really remarkably good photographs? This I don't know either, but he had a decent camera. So maybe that helped. And, you know, the other photography professional who tried to duplicate Hart's photographs was only trying to do it based on the theory of birds, and he failed miserably. So I think we can assume Carl Hart did not photograph birds or moths. That was another ridiculous explanation. So we're left with something that's, I think, genuinely mysterious here. And then when you tie it in to the fact that there were actually quite a few sightings of this phenomenon, and it was really mystifying to some very highly technically skilled, credible people. Incidentally, the professors that I showed you earlier, they, during the second sighting of August 31st, when they were seeing this again, or I think it was September 1st, excuse me, they're getting out there, they're trying to do their various calculations of the height, of the speed, of all these aspects of the object. And they were trying to do it from different locations in the city. They were getting together with other people, gathering information together to try to triangulate this. There were a number of people trying to do this type of thing. Very intelligent individuals, in other words, who were witnesses of this phenomenon, and many of them were not accepting the explanation that the Lubbock Lights were birds of any sort or any kind of natural phenomenon. It really was something, I think, that you might say almost disturbed some of these highly educated witnesses. So that's what you're left with, a really decent UFO case. And whatever the answer is, I don't know what the answer is. Was it actually an extraterrestrial craft? Was it an experimental craft? Or was it something totally different? But if it was something totally different, what could it have been? Well, there you go. Fascinating story. I don't know how, if you're fictionalizing these various Blue Book cases, I've never gotten how Hollywood and how network producers think. Never figured this out. They are convinced that they know what makes a good story, so they feel the need to meddle and change. And, you know, there's most of us who follow the UFO phenomenon really wish that that were not the case. But for my part, I've just given up. My attitude is when I see a TV show that gets anything right, I think, wow, great, they're doing a wonderful job there. Got that one right. Well done, guys. Keep going. But I don't really expect that too much. But the good news is that the series, I think, is bringing some attention to the genuine puzzling nature of many of these cases. And in my personal view, these cases from the 1950s in particular are some of the most fascinating UFO cases we have. They're all too much forgotten. And so any amount of information and attention that is given to them, for me, I consider that a good thing. And it's an opportunity for us to look deeper at the genuine cases and ask ourselves what really happened, and can we learn anything about them to this day? Relating to the Lubbock Lights, and this will be the last thing I guess I'll say about it, is what we've learned is you go back 65 plus years to the era of that sighting, and you find something that I think arguably remains inexplicable. Someone in 1951 was flying technology that, again, was not supposed to exist, but appears to have existed. Doing what? Well, unless you want to accept the bird's explanation. If that's the case, then all of this is a lot of to do over nothing. That's just not my opinion. Well, I want to thank you for joining me. As always, if you want to learn more about what I'm up to, I have a weekly newsletter. Tracy and I put it out every week. Typically, it goes out on Sundays. If you want to subscribe to it, it's free. Go to my website, richarddolanmembers.com. It's easy. We put it up on our Facebook page, Intelligent Disclosure, on Facebook, and we'll have it on social media, Twitter, even Instagram, and you'll see things like that. Sign up for the newsletter. Very easy to do, and that keeps you posted on all of the things that I'm up to during the week. If you like what you see here, please do like the video. Always helps me. And as always, subscribe to my channel. I'm here several times every week. I love what I do. I hope you enjoy being here as well. And with that, I just want to thank you all for coming out. So later.